All right, good morning, ladies and gents. Welcome to our next cookies lab. So, of course, we can't do a cookie unit without making classic chocolate chip cookies. Okay, so a couple things just with today's lab. Not only are we going to go through it like normal, there's a couple things just as far as how to measure ingredients by volume a little more efficiently and a little more accurately that I'm going to show you today. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the different ingredients that we're going through today and why we use things like, say, kosher salt instead of regular iodized salt. Okay, but first things first, let's go through the ingredients. Again, I will give you both volumetric and weight measurements. Again, I would really recommend going with weight measurements if you can. Okay, some of you guys are seeing in class, sometimes people are producing different results with the same recipe. A lot of that comes down to everybody's volume measurements are slightly different. If you want consistency, go by weight. Okay, all right, for the ingredients, you're going to need 2.6 ounces or half of a cup of flour, half of a teaspoon of kosher salt, a quarter teaspoon or a fourth teaspoon of baking soda, 2 ounces of unsalted butter or 4 tablespoons, or half of a stick, half a teaspoon of vanilla, half of an egg. Now, you can double up this recipe and make this with a full egg. Just again, you might need to supplement some of your own ingredients for that. 1.4 ounces or 3 tablespoons of sugar, white sugar, and 3 packed tablespoons or 1.6 ounces of brown sugar. Now again, this is kind of where also weight measurements do make a big difference here, because one packed tablespoon to you may be a little bit more, a little bit less than 1 packed tablespoon to me. Whereas 1.6 ounces to me is going to be the exact same as 1.6 ounces to you. But in order to measure it properly, what you're going to do is you're going to take your measuring spoon and you're going to pack that as tightly as you can. Okay, now, one thing I will say, what I'm just kind of giving you guys a heads up, what I did just there, like not having a glove on for a container like this, that is definitely not, serve safe, certified or anything like that. If a health inspector saw me do that, that would probably be a violation. However, this brown sugar is not being used for any of our classes. This is just being used here for the demos here. So I'm not super worried about, but I am giving you a heads up for when we are back here in class in person. Okay, so once I have this tablespoon measured out and it's packed, I'm just going to take a knife and I have my packed tablespoon. All right, so again, just giving you that heads up there. Now, for the flour, this is also one area I'm seeing a few people make mistakes and have a few inconsistencies when it comes to measuring. Now, give me 1 second, I'm just going to make sure the camera's still going. All right. So, when you are measuring flour with a measuring cup, you don't want to just take this measuring cup and then just scoop it right in. Okay, there you're going to have a lot of air pockets. If you've had flour that's been sitting for a little while, it's going to be more dense and more packed. You're not going to get an accurate measurement. Granted, you're not going to really get the most accurate measurement using volume anyway, but at least there's some things we can do to kind of minimize the risk of it happening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a spoon and I'm just going to just spoonful at a time, just scoop it into the measuring cup. Now, obviously for you, you'd probably want to do this over the thing. I just have to do it for the camera here. Okay, and then once you get to, about a heaping cupful, I'm going to level it off, and there I would have my half cup measured. Okay. Now, for me, I'm using weight measurements, so I don't have to worry about wiping away anything or any leveling or anything like that. I don't have to worry about that at all. Okay, it makes it much easier for me. Okay, last thing before we get started. I promised last week I would talk about the difference between these two salts. Now, some of you probably, when we first started this class, when we had our first recipe with the pancakes, you were a little confused when I said use kosher salt. After all, most of you guys use what's called regular table salt. Okay, now in these two containers is two different types of salt. Okay, we have the kosher salt here on your left, and then the regular table salt on the right. Now, why am I kind of so obsessed with using kosher salt, whereas Ms. Cabral, Mrs. Ruskin, everyone else has used regular table salt? A couple of reasons for that. One, this classroom is the Culinary Arts and Culinary Applications classroom, and we are cooking a lot of savory stuff, sometimes with meat. Now, first things here is, if I'm not sure if you're able to see from the camera, I'll bring it a little closer to the camera here in a sec, but the texture of kosher salt is a lot more coarse and it's a lot more gritty, whereas here, the iodized salt is very fine, almost looks like sugar. Okay, now let me bring it a little closer to the camera so you can see. Now here we have regular iodized salt, what you guys have at home, table salt. So, it's at your kitchen tables. This is what you think of when you think of salt. Now, as you can see, it's very finely textured, and if I put my finger into it, it doesn't really stick to my hand that much. Okay. However, if you look, kosher salt, if you've ever had a pretzel, you've probably had this type of salt put on the pretzel itself. Now, what's good about this is if you're cooking anything like a steak or chicken or anything like that, since the salt is, you can see, a lot more coarse, it's going to stick to foods a lot more easily. So if I, stick my finger in, you can see those sharp edges are designed or made in order to, grab on to this, or grab on and stick to meat. So that's obviously a really big thing, because if you were to, say, season a steak or a chicken with something like this, okay, hold on, the camera's starting to flash a little bit. If you were to season a piece of chicken or meat with this, the salt is going to not only bounce right off, but it's not going to stick. And also, whenever you eat something with this kind of salt on it, the first thing it's going to taste like is just pure saltiness. Okay, whereas this has a tendency to stick to meat and kind of dissolve. Now, why does that matter for baking and pastry? Well, in addition to kosher salt being able to stick to foods a little more easily, the other problem is with this, iodine. Now, what you have in your regular table salt has iodine. Okay, now iodine is a super important nutrient that you need in your diet. If you do not have iodine in your diet, you develop what's called a goiter. Trust me, it's a horrible thing. It's where your neck swells up and swells up into this giant pussy pouch. It's a real huge problem, especially in third world countries, Africa, some places in the Middle East. It's a really big problem. So what our country did, and what other developing countries have done, is that they've put iodine in something that everybody uses, salt. Now that sounds well and good. The problem is, we here in America, even in the most worst diets that we have, in our food system, we are going to get iodine naturally. So we don't have to worry about getting it for basic survival or nutrients. The problem that iodine has whenever you're cooking something is iodine is a chemical that oxidizes at high temperatures. What that does in foods is anything that is made using iodized salt, whenever you expose it to high heat, it oxidizes and develops this very metallic chemical sort of flavor to it, not something that you want. So this salt, when you put it into the oven to bake, is going to develop these kind of metallic metal flavors to it, whereas kosher salt does not have iodine in it. Okay, since kosher salt does not have iodine in it, and for the fact that it is a lot better using in savory applications, that is why we go with kosher salt. That's why I never use iodized salt for anything. Okay. Now, if you are using iodized salt at home, keep in mind you cannot replace this for this one for one. Meaning, if a recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of this, you cannot put in a teaspoon of this. Okay, because this is a lot more finer textured, you're going to have a lot more salt in that 1 teaspoon. It's not what you want. Okay, if you have to rely on iodized salt, then half the amount of salt in the recipe if it calls for kosher salt. So for this recipe, we are using a ½ teaspoon of kosher salt. Here, if you have to use iodized salt, again, it's not great, but if you have to do it, then go for it. You will need 1/4 of a teaspoon. So ½ teaspoon of kosher salt, 1/4 teaspoon of regular iodized salt. But I am not using this. It is not good for our application here, and it's not generally good to have in your kitchen anyway. All right? Okay. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Let's go ahead and continue on the rest of the recipe. Okay, so now going into our lab, let's go ahead and get our mixer over here. So as you guys remember from the cinnamon butter cookies, this is going to be assembled using the creaming method. So first step here, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. 350. First step is I'm going to cream together the butter and both of the sugars. So I have sugar, brown sugar, and I'm also going to add in the ½ teaspoon of kosher salt. And I'm going to turn this on just to slowly mix it to start, and then once it starts to kind of cream together, I'm going to blast the speed up. Okay, so you can see I'm just going slow speed for right now. Slowly turning up the speed. Okay, even that was a little too quick. Okay, and now I'm going to cream this together for 5 to 6 minutes. Do not rush this, take your time. Okay, I'm going to stop about halfway through, scrape down the sides of the bowl. Again, this step is super important so that the batter does not, or the dough does not stick to the sides too much. Okay, I'm going to keep and let it go again for the remaining time. All right, and there we have it. So nice creamed together. Now, one quick thing, I did change the paddle attachment just because the other one wasn't creaming the way I kind of wanted it to. So I just kind of made a small switch there. Okay, so that is step number 2. Step number 3 is you're going to combine and mix together the flour, the flour, the baking soda, and the chocolate chips into a bowl. Now, most recipes do not have you mix in the chocolate chips until the very, very end. The reason why I'm putting the chocolate chips in here now is because when I add this into the bowl here, I want there to be as little mixing as possible because you want to develop not as much gluten. So one way to do that is put the chocolate chips in ahead of time, so there's less mixing and the chocolate chips just get incorporated right from the beginning. Okay, so that is step 3. Step 2 was to cream together the butter and the sugar for about 5 to 6 minutes. Then step 3 is mix together the flour, the baking soda, and the chocolate chips. Now we go back to the bowl here. I'm just going to scrape lightly down the sides of the bowl. Okay. And I'm going to mix in the eggs and the vanilla. So that's step 4. Mix in the egg and the vanilla. So add in the egg. And the vanilla. I'm just going to mix that at high speed for just about a minute or so. I'm going to stop, just scrape down the sides of the bowl. Again, this step is a lot more important than you think, making sure you take the time and scrape down the sides. There you go. So nice, light, airy, and be until it's nice and smooth. Okay, now we're going to go to step 5, which is now you're going to have the mixer going on low speed, about 2 or 3 if you're using a KitchenAid. And I'm going to add in the dry mix here, a spoonful at a time. Okay. So here, by having the chocolate chips in, the chocolate chips are getting mixed in right away. You don't have to do any extra mixing here. So, again, going about a spoonful at a time. Okay. I'm just going to mix that together until you don't see any more dry flour. Now, I'm just going to stop here just for a moment. That. Just going to scrape down the sides here. And then mix until there's no more dry air and there's no more dry flour. There we have it. We have our cookie dough. Now, again, I know it's super tempting to get your hand in there and taste a little bit of cookie dough here. Just keep in mind the flour that you have is bleached flour, so you do what you want, but I'm just giving you that heads up. Okay? All right, now we go to our next step, which is to portion them out. So I'm going to pause the camera here, zoom it out, and then we'll move on from there. All right. Next step here, I believe that is step 6, is you're going to portion this out and then put on your baking sheet. Now, on the baking sheet, I have a sheet of parchment paper. Do not use wax paper. Do not use wax paper. Please, I will say that again, do not use wax paper. Those things are not oven safe, okay? They are layered with a small layer of wax that will melt in the oven. Okay, and it will get into your food. So use parchment paper or a silicone baking mat. Okay, so again, I'm going to be using a disher here. You can make these whatever size you want. If you want to make them a tablespoon size, you can. I am just going to go with a disher. Okay, so scoop, kind of scrape along the side of the bowl so that each one of those is nice and even. Now, this recipe should make anywhere from about 7 to 8 cookies or so. You're more than welcome to double it up if you would like. Okay, but again, if you were to not cream together the butter and the sugar properly, this would probably be it. You'd get 6, and you wouldn't have any dough left over in the bowl. Okay. So I'm going to arrange these out so they have a little bit of space. Now, if you would like, I think one thing that makes these really good is you can take a tiny bit of kosher salt and actually add a little bit of extra salt to the top of each one. Having that little bit of salty crunch at the top is surprisingly really, really delicious. Okay? All right, I'm going to go ahead and go into our last step here, which is to bake them for about 8 to 10 minutes or until the edges are just slightly golden and set. Remember, you want to take these out of the oven when there's maybe slightly underdone. You can always add time, you can't take it away. All right, so I'm going to set this in, and I'll see you guys again when these are done. All right, and there we have it. Okay, so as you can see, nice and browned around the center, but still a little puffy around the center. Now here, I would say I actually overcooked these just slightly. That's okay. Everyone has their personal preference, whether they like something that's soft or something that's crispy. Now, from here, let them cool just a couple minutes on the baking sheet before you take them off, and then you can serve them, preferably with a glass of milk. And that is today's lab. So make sure you have your mise en place sheet filled in. Then take the time to get everything set up and ready to go for tomorrow, okay? This recipe, especially if you have everything measured out and ready to go, should not take you more than the class period tomorrow. So take the time now, get these ingredients set up, just get them put away, do what you gotta do so that come tomorrow, you are ready to go and you can get these done within the hour, all right? All right, that is it. Go ahead and take care of that. If you have any questions, please let me know.